The math is the only math that prevents us from overissuing our own promissory obligations, because creditworthiness is certified by mathematic processes which are infallible even. Everything is accounted for already in the principles of mathematically perfected economy. Yes, there is some leeway in how you might deploy it or enforce payment in cases of abuse or penalize abuse. These are things that I abstain from arguing about them, because there are personal issues that you may want to decide however any particular society will. But so when we discuss these alternate propositions which arise, the real issue is what can they possibly offer? Why are they here? Why should we ourselves have to wade through them to find solution which always existed, which preceded each and every one of these Johnny-come-lately propositions long before the present day, 43 years ago. They solved all our problems. When we look at these things, we find dark and ugly things about, the propositions. In the case of Nasara, for instance, it's founded by convicted scam artists, and it originally proposed. It took my work and compromised it between the present system. It basically divided interest rates by 2 and proposed that would be sufficient to solve our problems, which of course is not true at all, and is proven not to be true because we are still in terminal failure and we cannot get out of terminal failure, even though interest rates have been dropped below the proposed ceilings of these scam artists. Who were convicted criminals. So what was the benefit of all that? And they're one of the first ones. And what has happened since then is we have just this huge list of pretentious people standing up as if there is a solution, or maybe not as if there is a solution, but that there's some intermediate step that's more reasonable to take, never establishing and proving that indeed an intermediate step is more reasonable to take even. And of course that idea is very dubious. Why? Mathematically perfected economy is an irrefutable proposition. It's the only case that the math is right. It has irrefutable arguments. If we are to prevail in anything, in the Republican form of government, which prevails so much across the world today, and yes, I understand that it's an abused form of government, but it's the purported form of adoption. In the United States, we could say we are not, in truth, a republic, even though we still have a constitution and ostensibly it's the supreme law of the land. Obviously, the plutocracy, which is a usurped representative government, is a weak one because it would already have nullified the Constitution if it felt so strong as to do so in utter defiance of the objects of a republic, which are why this country was established. So instead it chooses to undermine them in a conspiratorial fashion where this so-called financial system, the lie of an economy, is actually steering government every which way it intends, which of course is always to preserve the central banking system or usury or means of terminal exploitation. So we can't count on government to save us. There isn't some hero. Ron Paul isn't going to end the Federal Reserve System, which is 12 private banks prevailing in this obfuscation of the currency. He isn't going to end the Federal Reserve System by competing banks which operate on the very same obfuscation. He isn't going to end the ills of the Federal Reserve System by restoring a gold standard, which is mathematically impossible, which he has never shown a way, even to accomplish. So the question is, where are we going with all these bogus pretended solutions? Now, of course, the answer to that question isn't difficult to conjure or fathom, being as the universal starting point for all these imitations was an original thesis of inevitable failure and singular solution. So the answer is simple, that all we're doing is going around in circles, chasing our tail and taking giant steps backwards. For every new imitator who comes onto the scene, ignorant even of the fact of how many like them there are, with whom, of course, they are bound themselves to have to contend with if their preposterous imitation is to prevail, despite the faults they uniformly introduce with it, in asserting that they have something that's worthy of taking our eye off the ball. So, in the inevitable course of my work, I've accumulated incredible archives of these 11th hour pretenders every day, all day long nowadays. I receive, people inform me that such and such a site is claiming this or that, or is plagiarized things of which have obvious origin in my work, like the quote of Thomas Jefferson, which is literally displayed on millions of further websites as if it's historically accurate, without explanation of source or attribution of source. We have millions of web pages claiming Benjamin Franklin introduced a proposition of mathematically perfected economy, when in fact, the very source of that work is, of course, my Parable of Perfect Economy, where I explain through the mouth of Benjamin Franklin mathematically perfected economy. So in truth, these are very preposterous ideas, and unfortunately, they are regularly colored as well with motive of self-profit. Nonetheless, in the course of my work, I've accumulated these tremendous archives, literally millions of files, which are usually pictures of the offending site, the plagiarist, the imitator, the divisive entity, pictures of their entire pages, saved instances of their pages, dialogues between the offender and myself, in which they may or may not get nasty in defending their stealings from the very person that they stole them from. And so there's this tremendous amount of taxing work that I have to do to cover, the the eventual contest with these people, and I have early versions of videos which prove that these people weren't, credible authorities, that they didn't ascertain even what's wrong with the currency, that they in their amateurish imitation, they introduce a great number of very blatant errors, which really conveys a childish quality regularly in any of this work, so on and so forth. So what's difficult to appreciate, unless we are principled people, is that there's just a huge number of these preposterous pretended authorities out there today. The internet is free license to steal, free license to infringe upon intellectual property rights, to pretend authority, and to lead us all astray. Now, the severity of these crimes is huge when you think about it, because if you step out into the internet today, you don't know who began this. You really have to dig just through numbers to discover original source. And as people regularly tell me, nonetheless, still it is obvious, and I can attest to this myself, that my work still is the only credible source, because it is still the only solution. And largely, the plagiarists have all stepped over to the other side of the line because they have fallen for their own delusion that spending money into circulation somehow is accountable. They haven't done the math. I'm the one who introduced the idea in my 1975 Parable of Perfect Economy. But why? And after how long? It was one of the original things that I evaluated and discarded as not solution, because it is inherently inflationary. This obligation to pay and retire principle is indispensable, and who is it rightly imposed upon but the obligor who consumes of the property? And what is the rate of payment? All these things are already resolved in mathematically perfected economy, but they were resolved from a process of evaluating this proposition of spending money into circulation back in 1968, within months of, suddenly having this solution as a consequence of a mere comprehensive initial response to the preposterous proposition, A, that we actually suffer circulatory inflation under systems which collateralize debts or property. It's impossible to suffer circulatory inflation merely for the fact that we collateralize debts. And furthermore, to the proposition that circulatory inflation, which doesn't really even exist, causes price inflation, which demands the two different terms that I since have appointed to these two distinct things. So, right off the top of my head, I proved that interest is the cause of price inflation. And the question that remained was, the two questions which basically remained were, what are the rest of the possible faults? And then, of course, the foundation work of resolving that question resulted in this categorization of three categoric faults. And finally, the most trying issue perhaps is resolving what, if any, other prospective way of issuing money into circulation is a proper way. or are there multiple proper ways? Of course, debt is not the issue.